How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another video on the Warden. I'm gonna make this intro fast because there's a lot to this build that we need to go over. Now, first and foremost, you might be asking yourself, well, hold on, Pickle, how the fuck are you doing Moon and Sun on a Warden? Well, the quick and dirty answer is spell codexes. So just in case you don't know, on the Warden specifically, they only have physical, poison, lightning, and frost. They do not have a fire tree to go into to natively pick up fire skills. So right out the hop, you'd think to yourself, well, the Moon and Sun build is impossible to run because you're only going to proc your fire bonus damage and not your frost bonus damage. Well, if you use a codex or a spell scroll, in this case we are using Codex of Wall of Fire on my specific build today, when we cast this codex, it triggers that frost bonus damage on the Moon and Sun set. So we are able to utilize that set to its full potential and allow us to do crazy amounts of damage. With that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at what makes this build and how it functions. Alright, so getting into the items here now, this is going to be, you might be thinking to yourself, well, hold on, I want to know how this build works. Let's go over the items first, and then it will all kind of come together. The set that we are using today is the Snowstorm Armor. The reason why we're doing this is foes affected by a winter's chill take 15% increased damage from Snow Blast. This effect stacks infinitely. When triggered, Snow Blast now also summons a Snowball, which will hover above the target foe, building up damage based on the Snow Blast triggers. After about 3 seconds, a pause in the Snow Blast procs, or if the foe dies, the Snowball strikes the ground, dealing 120% of the stored up damage to all foes within 7 meters. And of course, for its 4-piece, 40% damage reduction, and we are fully utilizing the helmet, armor, weapon, and offhand for this build. Now, you could substitute this specific set out with the Torrential Remnant set. It does about the same. However, I feel like the Snowstorm set has a little bit more damage and AoE, whereas the Torrential set does pretty decent single target damage, but its overall damage is a little lackluster. So that is what we use for the set. Like I said, you could use either one. Personally, I'm going with the Snowstorm Armor on this one, but feel free to try it out. The other set that we're using, of course, like in the intro and in the title, we're using the Moon and Sun, both Amulet and Ring. The reason why is when casting a Frost skill, bonus fire damage is multiplied by 3. When casting a fire skill, bonus frost damage is multiplied by 3. The effect lasts 3 seconds. So just in case you are unaware of, essentially the way this works is anytime you cast a fire skill or a frost skill, it buffs the opposite one. So fire buffs frost, frost buffs fire. Since we are playing the Warden, and this specific build is a frost build, we don't necessarily care about how good our fire is. We mainly just run this set to boost all of our frost damage by 3, and it's multiplied by 3. So it gets pretty ridiculous. And then the other 2 items that we are running here is we are running Battle Boots as the base boots item in our slot. Mobility skills increases damage reduction by 34% for 7 seconds when used. And then lastly, we're using the Quadrupeds. Summons 4 skull companions for each skull representing one of the 4 elements available in the skill tree. The skulls have 200% damage of their chosen element, and their attacks will trigger player on hit effects. So in this case, what we're getting is we're getting a physical, poison, lightning, and frost skull, which is decent, but we don't necessarily care about the skulls. We're just using them to kind of boost our damage, which we'll get into here shortly. So those are the base items. I think you're pretty much locked in place here with most of them. The accessory you could swap out with a new accessory, but honestly, I don't know what you'd use. But before we get too crazy into what you can and can't use here, let's just go ahead and get into the runes real quick. So the biggest one here, and the most important one in my opinion, is on our boots. The rune that we're running is Boots of Snow. The reason why is Winter Blast no longer has a knockback effect and casts Flash Freeze when landing. So Winter Blast in the Warden skill tree is The Warden teleports up to 6.4 meters forwards, instantly dealing 490% frost damage at her landing location and knocking away all foes and a 4.6 meter radius up to a 4.6 meters, whatever, doesn't really matter. What we're using this is, we're kind of abusing this like we abuse the leap and the berserker, right? So this is going to be our main damage source for one, and second of all, this is going to be our main mobility skill to get us around the map as quick as possible. So pair that with the battle boots. Every time we are casting Winter's Blast, we are gaining that damage reduction, and also we are casting Flash Freeze from the Winter Herald tree, which is rapidly freezes all foes within 4.6 meters to the ground, making them unable to move for 3.43 seconds, which is decent. It's not the best ability, but it is a free skill, and we'll get into why we are running this later on once we get into the skills. So first and foremost, that is the biggest rune that you must have on this build. Going into more damage reduction with Lifeguard on our helmet, reduces the damage taken from all sources, including indirect, by 31%. It's pretty good. And then from there, we pretty much just kind of go into damagey items. We run Snowpiercer on our offhand. Snow Blast and Hail have an additional 20% chance to trigger. We then run Despair on our amulet. All attacks deal 27 increased damage to foes who are slowed or immobilized. So since we are practically immobilizing everything with our Flash Freeze when we land, everything's taking an additional 27% increased damage, which is pretty good. And then on our ring, we're running Jeopardy. Your critical hit chance is locked to 5%. And for each attack that lands a hit, you gain 20% critical hit damage for 3 seconds until you reach 10 stacks. After reaching 10 stacks, your critical hit chance is locked to 100% for 3 seconds, after which it resets. So this is just a great damagey item for this build. You could substitute this out with a plethora of different rings of your choice, but if you're wanting the most max amount of damage from, I guess, your items, Jeopardy, in my opinion, is going to be the one to go with. And then lastly, the biggest thing that you need to run on this build is Greatness. Greater Rune Cap is increased by one. The reason why is on our bow, we are running Gaia. For each active companion, damage is increased by 4%. So pair that with our rune on our amulet, which is Call of the Wild. All the Warden's companion skulls that summon 2 or more companions summon 3 additional companions. This is a crazy boost in damage. I'll be honest with you, on my character sheet right now, I'm currently sitting at 19,000 damage. Taking that bow off, it drops me all the way down to about 7k. Granted, I don't have a bow in my weapon, but you get the idea of it. That rune alone effectively doubles our damage by so much. It is ridiculous. I don't know if it necessarily directly procs off of the quadruplex amulet, because it is giving us 4 skulls, and it does say active companions, so I don't know exactly what the wording there, if we're getting the damage boost or not. But honestly, I want to say it does, just because like when I take that off, I notice a damage decrease. So it could be just because, you know, I'm losing Call of the Wild. Could also be because I'm losing the quadrupeds. So there might be a little bit more testing that needs to go in there comparing the two. But honestly, either way, I mean, the quadruplex item's pretty decent. I mean, it's a free extra damage out there. And if it does go towards the Gaia rune, then honestly, use it. It's just free, what? I don't know what 4 times 4 is. You do the math. That's how much damage we're getting increased. So yeah, so those are the items. I think that's pretty locked into place with the items. The runes you could probably mix around a little bit more. Do you need Lifeguard on your helmet? Probably not. You could switch that out for maybe a little bit something different. But for the most part, that is what I'm running. If you feel like there's a different rune or item that could suit this build better, let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, let's go ahead and move over to the skills and see how this build fully comes together with the items. Alright, so getting into the skills, first and foremost, with this build to effectively do its thing, you're gonna need to find a codex or have a surplus of scrolls in your inventory. The reason why is you're gonna need to find yourself either a codex of Wall of Fire or a codex of Ember Shield. The reason why is these are the only 2 fire scrolls that I know of, at least off the top of my head, in the game that, you know, are able to, that we have access to, that then trigger our sun and moon set for our frost skills. So if you don't have the codex or if you don't have the scrolls, this build isn't going to be as effective as, you know, it could be, but overall, I mean, it's still a pretty decent set, or it's a pretty decent build overall. So first and foremost, Wall of Fire, that's going to be our bread and butter, mixed in with our Winter Blast. This is going to be our main damage source and mobility skill for this build. Next, we get into Ice Queen, Hailstorm, Agility, Wolfpack, and Pixies to boost our damage with Gaia. For the skill trees, our two main trees that we're dipping into is Winter Herald and Stormcaller, and then lastly Druid, just for a speckle of damage reduction. Otherwise, getting into Winter Herald, we are putting 1 point into Flash Freeze, that way we have it. That way our boots are able to cast it. We then go into 3 into Frost Ward, increases all resistances by 20% for 6-7 seconds after using Flash Freeze, which is great. This is going to give us more damage reduction, survivability, must have. Next, we drop down into Briskness for reduced mana cost of all skills by 20%. And then into Tundra, reduces the cooldown of all skills by 10% as well. We skip over this skill here, we don't need it. Also, we skip over an auto attack because we don't need it. We do come down here for Winter's Chill, just putting 2 points in there because honestly, we just want to make it so it procs and to further our, and to allow us to go further into the tree. So we don't necessarily need to, we don't care about slowing them because they're already instantly getting frozen to the ground with Flash Freeze. We do skip over Winter Breeze and Ice Dash because honestly we don't necessarily care about, we have a lot of, we have high evade on this build, but honestly we don't necessarily care if our evade procs Winter's Chill or not, because with all our abilities we're gonna get Winter's Chill procced. We do come up here though off of Winter's Chill, grabbing Snow Blast for sure, putting 3 points into there. Foes affected by Winter's Chill are struck by a Warden's Frost skills, have a 95% chance to cause a Snow Blast, dealing 90% additional damage as frost damage in a 2.3 meter radius. This is where the most of our damage is coming from. Granted, I did say our Winter Blast is our damage source, but this is what's carrying us through this. We do not pick up Ice Splinters because we do not need to go into the physical tree at all. Jumping up here, we do grab Wolfpack. While active in a slot, summon 7 wolves to help the Warden in combat. The wolves each have 83% of the Warden's frost damage and 7,500 health. Use the wolves' hell, dealing double their damage to all foes within 4.6 meters. This is an easy choice. The wolves they do a lot of work, to be honest with you. And also pairing that with our Gaia tree, we're getting what? That much more damage. It's ridiculous. When you go up into Moon Howl, Howl also increases the damage of the Warden and her allies by 44%. We do not get Ferocity because we don't necessarily care about our wolves doing a whole bunch of damage. We just mainly care for them to be there to boost our damage, and their extra damage is pretty nice. We don't get into Biting Gold because, again, we're not trying to make this a pet build or anything like that. Jumping up here, we do grab Hail into Pelted, and then into Pummel. This is just free damage. I'll tell you what, right now, there's nothing wrong with building into this. And then our main source of damage here, Winter Blast. The Warden teleports up to 6.4 meters, like I went over previously. This is amazing. This isn't as good as Leap because we can't get it to having a zero cooldown or regenerate mana and health for us. So it is kind of like a poor man's Leap, but honestly, it's a pretty good ability and it does quite a bit of damage. Especially when you start pairing it with Sweeping Frost, increases the range of Winter's Blast by 25%. But then, most importantly, Shivers. Foes struck by Winter's Blast become weakened and take 15% more damage for 5.7 seconds. This is crazy. Not only is this our main bread and butter, every time we use it, we're making people take more damage. Then lastly, we're dipping into Hailstorm. Warden summons a large hailstorm, dealing 573% frost damage per second to all foes caught under it. The hailstorm has a 5.1 meter radius and a 5.7 second duration. Max 4 hailstorms can be active at one time. And then we grab Winter. Using Hailstorm increases frost damage by 25%. This is crucial. And then also Torrent. Each strike of hail has a 10% chance to lower the active cooldown of Hailstorm by 5% of the maximum cooldown. So this is good. You don't necessarily need to take Torrent with the current build setup that we have here, which we'll kind of get in a little bit more. But I will say cooldown reduction is a must for this build, just to ensure we can keep things proccing when they need to, and kind of allows for a nice flow into the build. And then lastly, we grab Ice Queen here. The Warden claims the power of the Ice Queen, increasing the base damage of all frost skills by 25%. This is a no-brainer right here, and lowering the base cooldowns by 25%. In addition, critical hit chance is also increased by 25%, which we don't necessarily care about since we're running Jeopardy on the ring. But we're grabbing this for the frost, the increased frost skill damage, and the cooldown reduction, like I said. So this is pretty much, honestly, for the most part, this is pretty much fixed, locked into place with the skills here. Like I said, you could maybe, if you get this build kind of fine-tuned, you probably could take off Torrent, put it somewhere else, but for the most part, I think this is a pretty solid build. Then we dip into Stormcaller here. We're grabbing Agility, increases evasion by 15% for 6 seconds. Into Swift, cooldown of Agility is lowered by 16%. We don't necessarily care about that, but we do care about Elusive. Agility also grants the Warden Elusiveness, making her immune to movement slowing effects. That kind of allows us to free up a spot in our Mastery tree later on. Then we do grab a Stormer, increase the damage of all storm skills by 15%, mainly increasing our Hailstorm damage, which is pretty decent. Then we do Siphon Energy, adds 50 mana on hit. The reason why we do that is just to further ourselves into the tree without having to pick up something we don't want to. And honestly, this build does partially suffer mana early on stages, but once you get the items that you need, it does all right. We do go into Paralyze. Critical hits from lightning skills have a 10% chance to paralyze foes, stunning them for 3 seconds. And then Tase adds a 100% chance when evading attack to paralyze the attacker. Since we're running a high evasion on this build, we might as well grab this to give us more CC, a little bit more survivability. And then for the main 2 things that we want to pick up here is we're picking up Pixies into Flutter. 1 into Flutter, just because we don't care about our Pixies surviving, but the main one here is Empowerment. Pixies gain the Empowerment or increasing the damage of the Warden and her allies by 34%. And then lastly, Wisps, granting the Warden 6 Wisp companions, striking at nearby foes with Chain Lightning, and then Empowered Wisps, making them more powerful. So if the Wisps count for Gaia, we are getting 6 additional companions along with our Pixies. 6 additional Pixies for a total of 12 companions, plus our 7 wolves, plus our 4 skulls. You do the math. If it all works well, we're getting a lot of damage increased. And then lastly, here for our last points, we're dipping into Static. Foes struck by lightning skills have a 30% chance to gain a charge of static. The charge holds 65% of the damage dealt by the triggering skill. At 4 charges, all charges are consumed for a chain lightning effect that strikes up to 3 nearby foes for a total damage held by the charges. We don't necessarily care about that, but it's free damage along with lightning rod. Static foes now also act as a lightning rod, giving Thunder a 60% chance to strike them when they are hit by the Warden's lightning skills, aka our Pixie and our Wisps. Deal 75% of the damage dealt and triggering skills as lightning damage. But we mainly grab Squall here. Lightning rods also cause hail from the Winter's Herald tree. If you have the skill, we do have the skill, so it's just a free frost skill getting thrown around out there for extra damage, and you can't go wrong. So lastly, like I said at the beginning here, we put our rest of our points into damage reduction here. You could come down here if you have extra movement speed, plop that in here. Otherwise, there's really nothing in the Wind Ranger tree that helps us, because we don't necessarily care about attack speed and archery skill damage. Take it or leave it. We don't need it. So yeah, so for the most part, I think the skill trees are pretty fixed. I don't know what else you could really do here. Add on to the build. I mean, you could maybe take away Elusive and go something in the Mastery tree. There's a lot to kind of play with, but honestly, there's really not a whole lot to play with. I mean, it took me a good bit to come up with this specific skill tree. And then finishing up the skills here, we are looking at the Mastery tree, and currently I'm 337 on my Warden. If you're higher, I'll kind of go over what you need and what you don't need. So first of all, we do start off in the Winter Herald tree picking up frost damage. Snowstorm, 30% chance to trigger Snow Blast. Frost Shield doubles the effect of Frost Ward, which is nice. We go to Immunity, 10% to all resistances. Freeze Snap, Flash Freeze also casts Cold Snap, and this is where shit gets crazy. So, going back into the Winter Herald tree on Flash Freeze, we can also spec into Cold Snap, but we don't because we essentially just get it along with our Flash Freeze, which instantly removes 1 second off of any active cooldown. So since we pretty much get our Winter Blast on a, instant cooldown for the most part, we are allowing ourselves to reduce the cooldown of everything else, including our spell codex and all our active skills. So that gives us an insane amount of cooldown reduction paired with already our high cooldown. So this is why I say you want to stack high cooldown reduction. That way you can pretty much just constantly keep all your skills like almost 100% uptime, and it's just, that's ridiculous. So play around with that, grab that. I tell you, it's a game changer. Next, we go into Hail Blast, 50% increased damage of Hail and Snow Blast. Since we're using both, might as well increase the damage of both of them. Otherwise, you could just go into increasing the Snow Blast damage with, Frost Blast, 100% increased damage to Snow Blast. Then we go into Whirling Snow. Snow Blast increases evasion by 1% when triggering, stacking 10 times and lasting 11 seconds. And then Winter Herald's Focus increases the damage of all Winter Herald active skills by 25%. And then lastly, Frost Affinity. Class Masteries now also increase frost damage with each point spent. Then we come up here and grab the Lightning. Going into the Stormcaller Mastery Tree, we're grabbing Shattering Hits for critical hit damage, pairing that with our Jeopardy. It's no brainer. Then we go into Increased Conduction, 30% chance to trigger Lightning Odd, which increases our chance to trigger Hail from the Lightning Tree. Then we do Counter Shock. Tase always triggers on Evade, which is nice. Storm Reflex, 5% evasion. Flutter Swarm for each living pixie, Sparky, or Stormender. The Warden's evasion is increased by 2%. Since we have 6 fucking Sparkies up, we get that much evasion, which is good. Charged Wisps, 100% increased damage of the Wisp. This one's okay. You don't necessarily need it. You could go with, Static Rods, for example. But honestly, I think the Wisps do a lot more damage than our Static or Rods do either way. Then we do grab Storm Spirit. When evading attack, a Storm Spirit will spawn near the Warden and repeatedly taunt all nearby foes. This is great. Since we have a high evasion rate, I think we get up to around 45, 44 evasion. We're evading attacks a lot. So then this helps out quite a bit, taunting a lot of enemies off of us. Since we are the Warden, this is kind of a glass cannon-y build. And since they took out the Balgar Staggering Boots combination of making it so you can take so much reduced damage, we gotta get all the survivability that we can. Next, we go into Hail Synergy, 75% increased damage of Hail, which is nice because it's just free hail damage and we don't necessarily care about the lightning. And then lastly, we grab Companion Affinity, 50% came in Companion Passive and Use Effect. And then lastly, up here, we do grab 40% Companion Damage, and then getting into the Master Trees, like I go over all the time. Just going to hit the big ones here. Grabbing Companion Damage, Companion Passive, and Use Effect. And here I am running Nimble on my Master Tree, become immune to all movement and impairing effects. That's just because I feel like agility doesn't get procced all the time as I'd like it. If you're sure you're making it proc pretty much all the time, you could switch this up to maybe, I don't know, Golden Touch or Commander, one of the two. Then we grab Calm Mind, extra 10% cooldown reduction, into Challenger, Elusive, Resist All, and then down here into Fortress, and then Frost Damage. And then from there, I would grab Health Leech, Bling, Critical Hit Damage is a big one, and then Companion Damage Reduction, which is okay. Allows our companions to survive a little bit, but we'd honestly, like I said, doesn't really matter. And then here, this is where you can kind of choose. You could go, I'd probably go with Master Tamer myself, 50% increased base health and damage for all companions. Otherwise, you could go Stormbender as well. So that pretty much does it for the skills. Finally, come to the moment that we all have been waiting for. Let's see how this build works and how it plays. All right, so getting into how this build kind of plays out, I'm sure you've already kind of coming up with an idea of what you need to do and how this build's kind of coming together in some aspects of it. Essentially, the biggest thing here is making sure you're keeping up your moon sun proc, primarily your moon proc, because your moon proc is going to be able to increase your damage by like 900% or whatever your amount of frost is that you're getting from that. Point is, that's where all your damage is going to be coming from, first and foremost. So the way to do that is to constantly keep up Wall of Fire, and in addition, keeping up with Winter Blast as well, because the Winter Blast is going to make everything take 15% increased damage. It's going to then cast Cold Snap, which is going to reduce the cooldown of all our active abilities, or pretty much all of them, including the spell codex. So that's going to be on cooldown as well. And then, yeah, I mean, that's what it is. So it's constantly spamming Winter's Blast, and then also keeping up Wall of Fire to make sure you get your moon proc up constantly. Outside of that, that's pretty much about it. The only other things is if you don't have it set up the way I do, where I abuse the I guess the abilities or putting everything on one button, basically, so it's Wall of Fire and then also keeping up Ice Queen as well. That's going to increase our frost skills damage by 25%. Also reducing our cooldown reduction, which at this point isn't too crucial of a thing, but having that high cooldown reduction in addition with the cold snap is going to make this build run a lot better. Also, Hailstorm, that's a must to keep going into synergy with Winter Blast. The reason why is Winter Blast is reducing or increasing the amount of damage, and also Hailstorm's also increasing the amount of frost damage we have, I think, by 25% as well. Outside of that, though, spamming Wolfpack and Pixies is going to be great. Wolfpack does great damage, especially with our moon buff up. Pixies is okay damage, but that's going to proc our, like Spark and our Lightning Rod, which is going to enable Hail to be casted a lot more. So it's really just it's pretty much spam everything in this build. And then on top of that, Agility for evasion for survivability. So it's pretty much the way I have it set up, which you can already see, is I have everything I have my Winter Blast bound to my right key along with Hailstorm, Agility, and Wolfpack. Now, I will be honest here, I don't know if Wolfpack gets casted all the time, so I would probably put Wolfpack and Pixies on the same key. They share relatively the similar cooldown, so I would do that. That way you ensure those are getting spammed when they need to. Otherwise, Ice Queen could be on that key by itself. It's on a long enough cooldown. And then same with Wall of Fire to ensure you can get Wall of Fire off when it needs to. Otherwise, play how you want to play. I mean, biggest things is what I said: Moon Buff, Ice Queen, Hailstorm. Those are going to be your key things, and then while also just spamming Winter's Blast. Otherwise, you can pretty much just play this build just by left clicking and right clicking. I mean, if you're on lower mythics, honestly, you're going to be shredding things so quick, it doesn't really matter if you're getting all your buffs up or anything of that nature. So that's pretty much how the build works. I mean, take it for a run. Let me know what you think of the build. Is it good? What would you change in it? Have you been playing it already? What, kind of let me know. I'm curious to see how people play this specific build or turn it into everything. I've said this in the past videos too, where it's like these builds aren't meant to be the build, right? This is not the way. This is just a good start base build, something that I come up with. I don't spend a whole lot of time, I'll be honest, to coming up with these builds, but enough time to make them get them to the point where I can see the potential of, if someone took the time, or if I took the time to really sit down and min-max everything about this build. I've already been kind of doing that a little bit with this build just because I find it so fun to play. I love those high mobility, kind of not necessarily high skill cap builds, but like, the unorthodox ones where it's like, oh man, how the fuck does this work? Kind of stuff like that. So yeah, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thanks for watching the video. I always appreciate it. And if you're not already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and like the video. It's YouTube. I mean, I don't know if I have to keep telling you this or not, but everybody else does. So I'm gonna keep doing it until it happens. You guys have been doing great so far. Keep up the good work. And like always, tell someone you love them. Take it easy.